of a party in here while we listen to that theme music. It's still funky. Thank you, TJ, the Sounds by Somewhere. Go check him out on Instagram. That's our producer of our theme music. Welcome to the Black House. We're in the house today with a couple of special people to talk about a very special topic. So I'll go right ahead, and Jawahir, just introduce a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jawahir Ahmed. I am a counselor, and thank you for inviting us.
You're welcome. And I've also got my whāngai here. Yay, Davion.
Yeah, I'm Davion. I'm happy to be back here and to talk about a subject that that really touches me, and it's affecting a lot of people. I'm happy that you're allowing us to have a platform for good.
A platform for good.
Yeah, it's a platform for good.
Platform for love.
Yeah,
love.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Black goodness up in here on this day. Yeah, that's it, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Oh, cool. Well, before we get into it, I just want to say I've just come from, well, me and Davion actually have just come from the marae visit at Orongomai Marae in Apaha. It was so cool. We got to learn about the marae and the different tribal people that belong to that marae, and there's even a post there for international people, so that includes people like us. So, and also we made poi.
Ooh, we got poi.
Yeah.
There we go.
And surprise, surprise, who was the person that made the best poi? You wouldn't believe it.
Munya.
Yep.
Oh,
dude.
congrats.
So we're gonna give him a clap for that.
Awesome.
He's champion poi maker.
Yeah.
People at Orongomai Marae, if you need a poi maker, contact me and I will put you in contact with Munya.
Poi networking.
Yeah, networking. We're networking. All right, so I'll just get straight into. Oh, and also behind the camera, of course, we've got Mia. How are you today?
Hi, I'm all good as usual. Just doing a little background. I always do a little wave on the camera, but the face that you never see.
All they get is a hand.
Literally, just at some point, that'll just be my character and the hand.
So today we're going to touch on a very tough topic, I suppose you call it. Yeah, it's a tough topic, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about how stress, trauma, and living with complex PTSD works, how it's connected. But we'll just start with the easy steps. We might not even get to finish what we want to talk about today, but we can always come back and do more shows on it. Because I think it's an ongoing thing. I think it's something that a lot of us experience, but we don't talk about it. We don't express ourselves, and even when we do express ourselves, people don't understand what they're hearing, or they don't understand the levels of stress individuals are going through. So I'm going to start out by, and hopefully, here's the point. This is not a judgmental thing. It's not a diagnostic thing. Jawahir is a counsellor. Davion has worked with people with stress-related and mental health issues. And of course, I live with it every day. Right. Wouldn't you believe it? Yeah, mental health looks like me, guys. That's what it looks like. All right, so don't freak out. I do all my freaking out when I'm at home by myself, usually. Sometimes you might catch me in one, but I'm getting much better at it. So, yeah, let's start out with, okay, you've got complex PTSD and you've got PTSD. So, complex PTSD is often associated with individuals who have experienced prolonged and repeated exposure to trauma events. PTSD can happen from having trauma experiences, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, for me, I was actually recently diagnosed, I didn't get the chance to mention that, but with ADHD last December. And so what I realized is a lot of the traumas that we go through in life that eventually shows up in adulthood, ADHD or whatever situation we have. So so definitely, yeah, and learning to cope with those things. So it definitely can, you know, change the trajectory of your life in adulthood.
Yeah.
If you aren't self-aware enough or want to reach out for help or just try to, you know, understand yourself in those patterns, it can definitely, you know, affect us.
Being a client and also being a counselor, reassure me that, you know, it's a daily struggle. I have seen people who really distressed by birth and, daily stress. When I came here, I met a counselor who want to counsel me and mentioned to me that because I come from a war zone, I may be exposed to PTSD. So yeah, definitely, and also being a counselor and seeing clients over the years, working especially with young people, yeah.
The amount of times people, GPs, actually refer people for PTS or trauma-related counselling or diagnosis, it doesn't happen. Do you think it happens enough?
Not really, not much.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know from my personal experience, I was misdiagnosed since I was about 18 as just a depressive. And really what I was experiencing was complex PTSD. But we weren't talking about complex PTSD. We weren't talking about trauma. Doctors weren't referring you for trauma counselling. They were putting you on pills. And yes, people with PTSD can also have depression and a whole lot of other things, but to deal with the trauma, pills will not cure that.
Right.
That will alleviate maybe the depression, or it might alleviate the anxiety, but the trauma, you have to process the trauma. What's your opinion about that?
So there is different types of trauma. I am sure you already mentioned. So to have extreme trauma, you have to be exposed to really distressful situation, either civil war or really traumatic event, which then can lead to having disorder, like you constantly reminded. For example, I'll give you one example, and this is not actually a big one, but it can show us a bit how some can be always distressed about event. So if you, let's say you are stuck in aloe vera, you always scared of going to be stuck there again. But and that's like simple daily anxiety or fear of something bad happening. But if
In
you
the
are
elevator.
but if you are being in a war zone, or if you are being exposed into what they call the big T, distressful events, you most likely to have the complex one, which you already mentioned, and that can last a lifetime. But if you go and talk to your GP might not give you a medication, though you get a referral to maybe psychiatrist or someone who's qualified in that area to give you the right treatment, which then they practice in a certain model to unpack that and deal with that. Yeah. But the word PTSD and trauma mainly come from a war. You have, because in the World War I, when the soldiers experienced distress and killing and bleeding and all this, that's the time they came to this, and the whole this was invented, and also the treatment CBT to treat the soldiers.
Yeah,
so
that's where it originally came from. Yeah.
So CBT model was also invented after that to treat those soldiers to recover from the pain they endure during the war.
Yeah.
But you also might want to know that CBT does not work for certain groups of people and ethnic background people because of cultural components, because CBT is highly paid model. All the funding and resources and research goes to CBT because the PTSD been, traumatic issue affected the soldiers those days. They also designed this model to treat, but then nowadays we also want to treat everyone, so it doesn't work for everyone, especially adult people. Yeah. That's what I went off track a little bit, but just want to explain CBT and PTSD, how they work together as well. Yeah.
It's fascinating when you mentioned the whole it doesn't work for everybody, and ethnically. It's important to be inclusive and to have people who are able to help those who have gone through different events, right? Because you mentioned coming from a war-torn country, we all have different bits of trauma, and one thing doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Like for me, it's nice I've been looking for a therapist who looks like me, right? Because there's certain things and there's certain ways that I walk through life that not everyone else will understand. And so when you have someone who understands, you're a person of color, it's easier for me to be vulnerable. Because with my past therapists who have been white, and that's fine, but we walk through life differently. And so I don't feel comfortable being racially vulnerable and talking about the things that I've gone through with someone who doesn't understand.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's
so
a big
there was, sorry to interrupt. There was actually an experiment about a color client with, European counselor, and if you look on YouTube, that will be on YouTube just by checking role play will come to you. So I think the reason was that the things that said had a trigger on him, because he was like, the color client was talking about how they were extremely being upset by what's said by so and so and certain person. So like you need to, and it was hard for him. Both was hard, like hard for the client and hard for the counselor, because they couldn't discuss, and all he could do was just listening. Because the colored person was talking about how racially he was not happy, and his wife, which happened to be a European, was removed from him because he was black and all of that. So when you are client, it's important that you are comfortable with your counselor, because once you bang, the second you're not going to say what you come to say, and it's about relationship, and if the relationship is not working well, then the counseling is not working well, because once you click and connect, you feel vulnerable and you feel wanting to say what is bothering you, then the healing begins. Then you're not going to heal, you're not going to connect if there is a issue going on. So always, regardless ethnicity, background, religion, whatever, you have to have that relationship with the counselor. It's all about relationship.
Yeah, it is really a working relationship, and that took me a very long time to learn, I think, as somebody who has been through that mental health circuit for so long, being misdiagnosed since I was about 18, and then finally getting the actual help that I need, but not until my 50s. So for me personally, like I can probably talk a little bit about what it is like to live with complex PTSD, which is what I'm diagnosed with. It's a struggle dealing with stress. It's a struggle dealing with a lot of people coming at me with questions and whatnot. That's really, really hard to manage time and stuff. And one of the things I think has been really hard during this therapy circuit that I'm on right now is finally finding somebody I feel I can trust, even though they're not my colour, they're not a person of colour, but I feel like I can trust her because she's actually shows me something that makes me think, I can trust you. I've had so many therapists that ended up crying on the couch when I was talking. So how the hell are you going to help me
when you cry?
if you're crying on the couch? Like, you're not going to help me. If my story is too traumatic for you, what are you going to do for me? You can't do anything for me. And so I've been through that situation several times. I've even had a counsellor actually try to enact stereotypical racial dynamics of a black woman on me when she didn't get what she wanted. So what I've found coming back to New Zealand is that we have to advocate so hard for our own mental health because nobody else is advocating for us. And if we don't fight for it, if we realise there's a problem and we realise we need help, we actually have to fight to get that help. Yeah. Unfortunately, we shouldn't have to fight that hard, but with the lack of people of colour in these particular roles currently, there's very few counsellors or psychologists or psychiatrists that are doing trauma therapy. The chances of you being diagnosed with one thing and not having even the other thing looked at is quite high. I'm just imagining that because I lived through that. I lived through that. At one point, my cabinet does look a little bit like a chemist, but it really looked like I was the pharmaceutical company at one point. So yeah, it was bad. It was bad. And I'm like, but none of these things are helping me. And the thing was, the GP that thought they knew everything doesn't actually know everything, right? Like a lot of the GPs don't know about trauma. Or like you said before, you said that's a separate study. If you're becoming a therapist, trauma therapy is a whole other separate, and not all therapists do that.
Yeah. So like you can become a counselor and then you can choose certain area to specialize. Yeah, or you can become, after that, you can do masters or whatever you choose, and you have to specialize in certain area to practice in certain area. But then you can also be a social counselor. So
I would like to see more people doing trauma counselling or trauma therapy training. The only reason I say that is because of the communities of colour that we have in this country that daily have to deal with racism as a part of their reality of living in New Zealand. And I know that my thing that sent me down when I was still in Australia, that sent me down the rabbit hole, was being under repetitive trauma, just trying to keep a roof over mine and my son's head. Even though I had a good job, I was working in mining, you could get sacked at the drop of a hat for nothing. You could get laid off for nothing. And the first people to always go were migrants, people of colour. Especially after the crash, people's industries, they shrink, they get smaller, and so they protect their own. You're not protected.
absolutely.
And unless you're like one of those guys that likes to, kiss up to where everybody is, which I'm not that way naturally.
Yeah.
You'll be the first one to go. It's like Survivor Island. I know I could never win that game. I'll be kicked off the island first. Anybody with a personality got kicked off the island first, right? So
you're not alone in that.
So there was this constant pressure to not only keep a job, but also keep a roof over your head. And I had a child that was dependent on me, so it was just this endless cycle of moving, because they're having a housing crisis in Australia too. They were having a housing crisis when I was there. So you're getting houses sold out from underneath you. So you're constantly either moving jobs or moving houses, moving jobs or moving houses. In fact, my son has actually said to me, Mum, I was traumatized by all the moving. By all the moving. Like, you missed the whole part of changing jobs every 9 months, and having to jump from mine to in town to mine to in town. It was crazy. Even though the money was good, there's a lot of pressures on Kiwis that go there. So with that unsafety, that feeling of like that you're walking on water, you've got no stability.
Absolutely.
I was getting re-traumatized. It was bringing up old stuff, really old stuff that I packed away for decades. I packed it away for decades. Never dealt with it. Told just take those pills, you'll be right. And one day I came home from a mine and I'd been laid off, and the reason was oh, just that way? That's just the way. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Our crew was safe. The day before, one of our crew members had started an argument with me about Muslims. And I turned around to him and I said, bro, you've been having breakfast with a Muslim for the last 3 months. And I went to work. The next day I didn't have a job. Just like that. Easy as. But I was lucky. The guy that ran the mine made sure I got my papers. Because when you get trained on a mine, what happens is all the training papers you get for driving trucks, for driving different operations, blah, 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 they keep your training papers, even though they're nationally accredited training papers. You don't go home with them. You have to go back to town and then pay for the training again in town, right? And that might cost upwards of $5,000.
Oh my God.
So the mine manager knew that I'd been dismissed unfairly. And no lawyer's going to take that on because the mines are as big as pharmaceutical companies. Nobody's going to take that on. And what kind of evidence do you have when they make sure you leave your phones at your room,
Right.
at the camp? You can't record things.
Yeah.
So basically I went home from this mine and I went to bed and I didn't get up for a month. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. Like I just couldn't do it anymore. Because by that stage I'd done 11 mines in about 8 years. And we'd moved about 6 times in the same amount of time. And any sense of security, and this is why I'm always warning like young people when they go to Australia. You know, it's smart to get employment insurance, wage insurance. It's smart because there's no safeguards for you while you're a New Zealand citizen over there. All you have is Medicare, and if you have children, you get the parental payment if you work. As soon as you get sick, have a mental health breakdown, get injured, you're on your own. So you've got to have that insurance. A lot of us live with this false sense of security that when we go to Australia, it's just the same as New Zealand, but it's not. Not until you get that residency. So while we've got that change now, governments, because they got a Labour government over there, well, they got that change, take advantage of it. If you go over there, apply for your residence. Don't live in a country and not live in limbo. Because the stresses on that is really difficult. So that's when I started going down the rabbit hole, and I didn't know that that's what was happening. And then, you know, there was no work. There's no work because I couldn't work. I literally couldn't get out of bed. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know why my body just shut down. And it just went on and on like that. And I had to get back to work. I had to pull myself up on my feet, but I wasn't the same. Like I knew something wasn't quite right. And what had happened was I had all this past trauma of growing up, violence. I'm not going to go into details. You know, we've got to keep it PG in here. So violence, abuse, gang violence. I'd had all of that happen from a very young age, being abandoned by my family, having to raise myself since I was, 13, 14. And all of that came to a head in my 40s. I'd buried it. And I think that's what a lot of people with trauma do. They bury it, and then eventually it leaks out.
Yeah, it gets worse, yeah.
Yeah, it leaks out. And it leaks out in illnesses. Like I'm managing multiple comorbidities at the moment. I have to pace myself. I can't take on too much, but I'm used to taking on a lot, right? Because I'm what they call high functioning. So high functioning people, they don't appear like they have health issues because they're high functioning. But the reality is, in that high functioning, they're managing all the stuff in the background, like you know, when cortisol and adrenaline are rushing around my body and I'm highly stressed, and you might see my eyes are a little bit wide, it feels like my skin's electric. That's what it's like living with it. Your skin just gets electric, like, and you feel a little unbalanced on your feet, but you don't feel dizzy. You just feel like, yeah. So, and in those moments, you can't bring it down. Right? It's really hard to, you can't just say, oh, I'm just going to go home and have a rest. That's not going to happen. Because you've got cortisol and you've got adrenaline rushing through your body. You can't, it's not going to happen. And what's going to happen is you're going to fix it. And you're going to go, I've got to solve this problem. I've got to solve this problem. That's what they do. And I think it's very hard to recognize, you know, and it's those things like that highly stressful situation, like when I lost my work in the mines, the last mining job, and the conditions of it. It was more the conditions of it that was the shock, because that was so racist. It was so, and incidentally, 3 of the other Africans that were at the same mine got laid off as well. Wow. So it wasn't just me, right? You know, and that's what happens in recessions. You know, that happens a lot. I think another thing that we don't talk enough about is the traumatic effects living in a country that you have to live around racism on a day-to-day basis has on people's self-esteem, their well-being, and then we don't talk about it enough. We try to talk around it.
Yeah, people are scared to talk about that. I always wonder about that. Yeah, I agree with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, racism played a large part in it in my youth, you know, as a kid. Because, you know, I was born at a time when there wasn't a lot of Africans here. And the Africans that were here weren't allowed to stay here. And so I was actually born in hiding. A lot of people don't know that. I was born in hiding and explained away as I was found in a cabbage patch. Right?
Yeah.
My family didn't, my cousins on my mother's side, they didn't know where I came from. Nobody knew where I came from. My grandfather swooped in, grabbed the black kid, took her home. Right? So, you know, and growing up being the raisin in the rice everywhere you go is really hard. And you learn quite young that if you were going to survive being surrounded by different tribes that are not your own, if you want to think of it in that way, you better learn how to fight. Because guarantee you they're going to fight you. And this is the sad thing, I think, when I think about our young kids today, is a lot of them are still going through that. They're still having to fight just to be respected. They're still having to fight just to exist. When I hear a kid saying they're being bullied at school, I don't think they're just being called the N-word.
Yeah.
I think they're having to punch, kick and scratch and put up with a lot of microaggressions just to get through the day. That's the first thing that comes to my mind because I grew up here. Yeah, go ahead.
To add to that, honestly, I don't think parents, at least coming from a younger perspective, I don't think parents really understand, or even just grown-ups and guardians in general understand the extent to how severe bullying gets. I've had instances where I've had to protect kids who are younger than me from bigger bullies, and they had to stand behind me, and you know you're about to receive that punch from somebody who, and it goes from berating the clothes that you're wearing to down to your who you are and who you believe you are at the core.
Yep.
And you get lost very quickly when you're younger. And all you have is just survival tactics and like, just how do I keep going? And if that's your mentality, you're going to develop coping mechanisms. You're going to develop vices. And that's why so many of the youth have like nicotine addictions. Alcoholism is such a huge thing. Drugs is such a huge thing because we're coping with the fact that we were on survival mode for years.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of like a loose cannon. We're in a free space and we don't know how to navigate it because free space also means danger can come from any direction.
Exactly.
And the mind can't comprehend that.
Yeah, I want to add to that. You know, my daughter, you been last time on Women's Dinner, my daughter still suffers from that bullying, which made her hospitalized.
Yeah.
She's still unwell for 1.5 years. She's made to believe, she's not what I think. She is not as... She was academic, as I mentioned. She was good at what she was doing in her school. We were happy. She was really doing well. But, when you are a child, when you are that age, when you are in a primary and intermediate school, your mind is still fresh. You are susceptible to a lot of negative things. Your brain recepts those negativities easily.
Yep.
And she was made to believe that, she's not cool. She's not, her skin color is different. And they said, she told me, Mom, they told me, if you are not our friend, we could be popular. You're holding us back from being popular. And
see, it's that breaking down.
Yeah,
to
they made her believe like she's nothing, and she believed that for the past 2 years. She's been to psychologists, to counseling, been hospitalized. She finished her high school, but the trauma and the shame and the pain and the guilt, and she questioned her own being and makes you feel nobody, and that is really. Yes, go ahead.
That brings up those responses to trauma.
Yeah.
Fight, flight, fawn, and what's the other one?
Or fight, flight,
freeze.
Freeze.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got, depending, on what type of, probably the personality of the individual, you'll either freeze, you'll be fawn.
My daughter frozen.
Oh,
I love the inclusion of fawn, because the uprising of a lot of people discovering that they're people pleasers, and using the right terminology, that you have a fawning response.
That's exactly the problem. Like kind people. My daughter is very soft. Like you mentioned, the traits, the personalities of one, how they depends on how they respond. My daughter didn't respond. She defended herself. She became quiet and just back to her shell and couldn't do anything. And that is why this bullying thing affected my daughter so bad, because she could not respond and defend herself. And when you are that state, when you are perceive yourself as a kind person, and you are naturally kind person, we have the tendency to believe others are also kind, they're going to be nice, which is not. And I really, if we take any advice from anyone, and we have to take our time when we meet people, when we see people, when we are communicating with adults and young and anyone, it's important when to take time to learn that person's personality, not to give in 100%. Especially if you are a codependent, especially if you are a sensitive person, if you are caring, you have to wait and not to expect and presume that person is going to be like you, they're going to support you, they are like you. Because we get excited when we see someone with, oh my God, I find someone like me, they are nice. No, you don't know. So it could be many reasons as to why one might be, going to disappoint you. One, they could have some kind of trauma and issues and like disappointment themselves, so they're always protecting themselves. Like I also protected, you may be protecting yourself because of what happened to us in the past. And other one, they are just there for a recent short time. So we need to stay back and not to give in when we meet people. That is the only way we can protect a little bit about ourselves.
I think I was always a tomboy. My mum said I was always a tomboy. My nana said I was quite a tomboy as a kid. So when I started having these really serious, like fights, like I'm talking about kid fights where they're trying to punch you and kick you and throw you into hedges and things like, from age 8. This started at 8. This is just school. I'm not talking about the stuff that was going on at home or out there on the streets, right? But I think for me, my response has always been fight, because I figured out pretty quickly that if I don't learn to beat up my bully's going to beat me. So I learned quickly how to fight, and I probably learned from the best group, probably the worst group of people, but the best group of people, Tongan gang members, okay?
You gotta learn how to fight, learn how to fight. Right?
Want to fight? I don't know what that is.
So, it's probably not the best, but at that particular time it was the best I could get. So it was all about, I never went through that flight, the flight or the fawning or whatever. And so my immediate response to a threat is to fight. But when you realise you're in the throes of a dissociative moment, and a dissociative moment's when you're not actually in control of your body anymore. Now you're actually operating on survival mode. You're operating on adrenaline, on cortisol, you're not even thinking. You actually feel like you're a little bit outside your body, and you're walking into a scrap, and you're probably leading it because you're trying to protect your space because you don't want to die. That's really dangerous. And I became aware of those in life and later in life, and not realizing, not really paying attention to that's what's been happening all the times I've been in those threatening situations, because you're just in that state of wanting to survive it. You don't want to die. So I don't know how many people out there have been stabbed or shot. I've been stabbed in the neck. I had 42 stitches up in the back of my neck. I was only 17, so this is the thing. I was always in this survival mode, and you develop this thing you develop behavior traits that actually support your survival mode. Like, one of the things that I've noticed that's changed about me is that I'll actually dress up to go out now. I dressed tactical most of my life. For most of my life, I dressed tactical. That means I dressed with the thought that somebody may attack me. The other thing that you do when you have complex PTSD is you have different mannerisms. Like, if I'm walking down the street, I'm always like this.
Yeah.
Because you're hypervigilant.
Yeah.
All the time.
You're in defense.
You're in this, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Whatever's coming, I got to be ready. I can't be ready all the time. Not unless, I become this fantastic bodybuilder or something. I can't. My age is catching up with me. I'm getting too old for this, to live like that. And that's another thing that happens as you're getting older. Now you're like, oh, can I protect myself the way I used to be able to protect myself, because I'm not as strong as I used to be? How am I going to survive? So you have things like, you have weapons by your bed. I've got this phobia of home invasion. I have weapons by my bed. Well, it's not weapons, it's a hammer, actually. Don't break into my house. I'll break this down. Right? Don't even try.
Fair warning to the audience.
Fair warning to the audience. Yeah. Break into my house, you're dead.
Everybody's listening now.
I was like, what do you say about a hammer?
Hello,
What's going on?
Yeah, blame it on the CPTSD. But these sort of things that other people aren't thinking about. They're not thinking about that because they're not living with that. But I'm living with that every day, and it affects your sleep. It affects if you've got comorbidities, like I've got diabetes, I've got other things. It affects your quality of life. You have to pull back from people. You have to have time. I'm very careful about who I drink around. I don't drink around anyone, because certain personality types can trigger me, and it puts me in a bad space. So I prefer not to be around them, for my own mental health, for their personal safety. Yeah, because I don't want to be triggered to a dissociative moment because I've let somebody poke the bear all afternoon. No, I'm not going to do that. Mia.
I mean, see, the one thing that I'm seeing right now, at least just looking for it in a different perspective, is the way you grew up and the way I grew up. So I had to grow up sort of not, oh gosh, this is going to sound so bad. I don't mean like smart, but I mean as in I had to find my way out with my head.
Yeah.
Because I was tiny as a kid. I was so small, and I did try hitting some people. It didn't go far. I got beat up a lot. So I had to find a way to cope with my head, and in the sense of, how when you're walking down the street, you're looking over your shoulder to see who's coming. For me, when I meet anyone, I'm thinking, what are they going to say? How do they perceive me? I'm thinking of any way you could take that conversation. And most people are like, oh, you're so social. I'm like, I've thought of 5 ways this conversation could go. I know what you're about to say. This is something that just runs in the back of my head. And
it's being hypervigilant.
Yeah, it's like different forms of hypervigilance depending on how you grew up and how the society around you traumatized you enough to be, you know?
Yeah.
So you just have this extra sense of awareness that might manifest in different ways, and that's why it's in different ways. Like,
And you spent a lot of time growing up outside of Tanzania, right?
No, I grew up mostly in Tanzania until I was like 17, and then I went out.
Okay.
And that's where I kind of like adopted a lot of different cultures, and I was exposed to different people. So essentially, I left before I was even 18.
That's
And
quite young.
yeah,
For
it's
Tanzania, that's
young.
quite young.
Very. I think, yeah, I was one of the younger people who were leaving, and I think now it's more common for like young people to leave Tanzania. But yeah, so growing up, I still had the mindset of like, I'm in Tanzania and da da da. And so when I left Tanzania and I'm like now dealing with different people, it's not a different environment, I'm like, damn, these coping mechanisms are not working the way they should.
Yeah.
So now you have to adapt again. Because before it would be like, okay, I could try like with my words and like, if I say what, like I had a pepper mouth. If I say 1, 2, 3, you're done. You're not talking to me anyway. Move to Canada, you can't do that. You need to be conscious about what you tell someone because, you know, just adapting with the times and I guess like bringing it back to how hypervigilance just displays itself. It's like a coping mechanism that you update.
Update constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. But like, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's my
Do you
view
think
on
it goes into the, you know, like the code switching
yes.
and stuff like that?
That's fawning.
Right.
That is deep fawning. So the
Deep
one thing
fawning.
that yeah,
It's
like the
deep
one
fawning.
thing the
Okay.
Black community doesn't talk about is the fact that so I don't really have an accent because Tanzanians don't really have accents, but there's a way I would speak to my friends. The English I would speak to my friends. It's English, but it's just different.
Yeah.
And then there's a way I switch in front of teachers, professors, adults. It's totally different, and you can tell because like a lot of girls, there's a lot of Tanzanian girls, your voice gets softer, you're all of a sudden like nodding a lot and trying to make yourself small. Because phoning is like you're trying to please the other person and make yourself the least threat in the room.
So that
And
is,
so,
I want
yeah.
to, can I add something to that?
Yes.
You know, it was last night, me and my other friend who happened to be an African, we were just talking about how, you know, African people behave when we like, for me, it makes me a bit sad. I'm an African, and when I see an African person, I'd like to be bubbly, I want to greet them, I want to like talk like you talk like an African person. But when you go to events, it's when you see this like, these people who consider highly educated, like, you know, holding PhDs, whatever they call PhD, XYZ, like, they don't want to talk to African person. They just lean into like non-African. It's a class.
Classism.
Yeah. But it's like, okay, but I'm African. You're African. Can I say hi? They feel ashamed, which means they are not comfortable with their own skin, and makes you sad. And then they talk differently, and yeah. So
I think it's levels to it because this is a really extreme example, but it's the same way people have an attitude when talking to autistic people.
Yeah.
It's like some people will go out of the way to avoid talking to someone who's autistic because they know it takes a little more effort to be able to communicate and understand and make sure that they understand what you mean. You know? And so when it comes to when you're in these professional environments, which are predominantly Pakeha, you have people thinking that it's going to take extra. It really is. It's like extra effort to understand this African person and their complexity, and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm just going to interact with my own because I don't have to put any more effort.
But she's talking about other African people.
Other African people doing the same thing. Oh my gosh, sorry.
Those are like highly educated Africans who even happen to marry externals. And
externals.
I'm not in an interracial relationship. They're just external.
Interrelationship marriages. You don't want nothing to do with Africans anymore, I think. I kind of bit ashamed to have that relationship with other Africans. So they often avoid talking to Africans. They're more leaning into, you know, the business world, and you know, when they see us African person, they don't want to greet you and say hi. I have noticed that I attended many highly exclusive like events, and I've seen those people, and they call themselves Africans, and they are educated, so they avoid other Africans. They avoid the connections, and
And-
saying hello.
Yeah, there's definitely, I
I'm
definitely
like,
get
is
a
that
sense
colonization? Is
well,
to do
I
still
definitely get a
colonization?
sense of classism from
And
that.
And colonization
Yeah, it is.
impact as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Because I
Absolutely.
Because
think
they still
you
have
get
that,
more-
their brain, it's not, yeah, they still
Still there.
controlled.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think, I actually agree with you in that point. I think there's a lot of classism in our community because, even being mixed race and growing up in New Zealand, mainly predominantly around Māori and Pacifica people, some people had an attitude about me, right? Because I don't talk with that nasally Wellington accent.
I'm typical
Sorry,
of
sorry
Somali.
politicians.
See, I never thought that was a word to describe it, but okay, that was spot on. Like a weird
Yeah,
way.
right.
Because we all knew what she was talking about when
Yeah.
she said that nasally Wellington.
Yeah, like when I first came here, and this is when I had my dreadlocks, and like back in the day when it wasn't as cool, it wasn't as cool and fashionable, it was more deviant, right? And I just thought, why does everybody have such a nasally accent in Wellington, right? But it's like I came from the provinces where everybody's working class, unless you're old money from the provinces, right? So every working class people talk quite differently to middle class New Zealand. They've got a different accent, and down here is another accent. If you go to Auckland, it's another accent, and so people pick up your accent and they assume a lot about you by your accent, right? This is when they talk about cultural capital. A lot of it can just come from your accent. If I could put on that nasally Wellington accent, which I don't have.
I think you're amazing on the radio accent. You're amazing. The best voice for it.
I've got the best voice and the best face for it.
Absolutely.
I don't know why you laughing.
Says that as he's laughing
Liya.
as well.
Yeah.
Before we forget, I want to add something. You mentioned like how racism and daily struggle
I think
can
it's a
give you
daily struggle.
additional trauma. Like when we are exposed to daily microaggression, and this is something that you mentioned previously. That also has a huge impact in our body and our daily functioning and our mental health, in our heart and our internal health as well.
Because it's devaluing
Yeah.
constantly.
Absolutely, but people don't realize and people don't address. And I also, you mentioned our community doesn't talk about racial issues and go deep and trying to resolve and actually addressing issues. And I think one of those ones is because the cost is too high for some people actually to address those
them.
Yeah.
issues. So we rather sweep under the carpet because we're minorities. And truly we are exposed to some sort of racial issues, like when it comes to who gets that job, who can say what,
Who gets the funding?
who gets the funding, who has access to what. And when I actually thought about it, I realized, oh my God, this actually living it is easier, as pain as it is, it's also maybe a bit better than saying it's something, because I know people are scared of losing fund, losing status, losing friendships, losing positions.
Oh yeah.
So it's
Nobody likes the truth teller.
absolutely, and
But sometimes some of us have to be brave enough to be
absolutely,
truth tellers.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's why we're here today discussing this. And thank you so much for bringing out this. And I haven't seen anyone else actually talking about it. So thank you so much. I truly
welcome.
appreciate putting
And I
us
think-
together and talking about this. It's a very important issue.
It's so important because it's killing us right now, quite literally. When I'm thinking about these young kids that have committed suicide and these young kids that are getting bashed up on the street and semi-lynched, that's not good enough. And
Absolutely.
I remember when things got to a head back in the late 80s and David Foucault, who was a guy that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, lost his head, quite literally, at Otara Markets. Now some people out there might remember this story. That was when the elders got together in the Pacifica communities and said, we've got to deal with our young men out here in these streets in Auckland, because now they're cutting off each other's heads with a machete, right? So what I'm saying is I'm trying to use what I've learned in the 50 plus years I've been on this planet about growing up here black and black identifying. I mean, I'm quite happy to call myself black identifying or African identifying, because while I'm emotionally attached to ethnicity, the reality is I deal with racism on a daily basis. So those people that are not us don't know that I'm a Tanzanian, or that you're a Somali, or that you're Nigerian, or that you're Tanzanian. They don't know. They just know that you're black. Right? So I don't want it to get to that point where our kids are dying at such a rate that that's the time when everybody has to say, oh, maybe you need to do something about this. We need to do something about it now. We need to create these safe spaces somewhere for our young people to talk about what it's like growing up here, and for people like you that have got, and you and myself, to actually share our stories and say, it's not, you're not the only ones. We've gone through it too. What can you learn from our experiences, and what are you going to do better so that your generation doesn't have to go through the same stuff? And unfortunately, whenever you're going to make a change in any society, some people have to be passionate enough to stand up and say the hard stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? And say the stuff that probably people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be people, younger people, that are going to be coming behind you that are like, no, we need to talk about this. If we don't talk about this, bad things are going to happen. And bad things are already happening.
Right.
We're on drugs, we're smoking, we're drinking, we're blah, blah, blah. We're having stupid relationships with stupid people. And, you know, we're not happy, and we're depressed, and we've got anxiety, and we've got trauma issues, and we've got depression. And where are we going? Where are we going to, where is a safe place for us? Because I knew for me, when I was young, when I was suicidal for a good 10 years of my life, the main thing is I had no safe places. There was nowhere safe that I could go. Everywhere I went, I became the person that was beaten, that was bashed, that was assaulted, that was the story of my life. So I'm just, when I'm seeing these things happening on our streets out here now, I think nothing's changed. Where's our safe spaces? We need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think also one of the main important to consider is that young people, when New Zealand has the highest rate of youth suicide. Girls higher than the boys. But I think that younger people, when they are experiencing mental health issues, and sometimes extreme mental health issues, they are most likely to be medicated. And medication also causes some type of suicide feelings when your medication is roller coaster, or no one is monitoring, or stopped. Youth might feel the tendency to youth might feel suicide. So it's really important to educate the community, and also to have the discussion about service provider as well can be an issue, especially if you are not from New Zealand. You need to get to know the service provider, what kind of service they provide, doctors or psychiatrists or psychologists or social workers. You need to know their role, and you need to have the relationship to understand actually what happens, especially if I'm taking medication, or someone I know taking medication, or my clients are taking some type of medication, because everyone has a different role. And there is something called cultural competency. And if you are being treated in a Western perspective, and you will have a different kind of beliefs, or the system doesn't work for you, then you have the right to question. Because Maori has their own culture. Other indigenous have their own culture. So it's important to have the information that you need to, to stay safe, and to have that full information. and to heal and to have that.
So
Yes.
I'm just looking at the time. We've got 10 seconds left. So what I think this could be an ongoing thing. You can come back again, can't you, Jawahir?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Davion. Thank you, Mia. And we'll see you next week.